What if the thing staring back at you from the mirror isn't really you? Ethan Callahan thought his life was haunted by hallucinations, strange reflections, whispers in the dark, a condition doctors couldn't explain. But when a mysterious biotech company recruits him for his unique abilities, Ethan uncovers a horrifying secret. He was never sick. He was engineered. Now trapped between science and something far more sinister, Ethan must face the terrifying truth. The real threat isn't what waits outside, it's what's already inside. This is the Reflection Protocol, where identity is no longer safe. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't delivered like the usual mail. It was already sitting on my doorstep when I opened the door to grab the newspaper. The paper was still damp from last night's drizzle, but the envelope was bone dry, as if it had never touched moisture. No return address, no postage stamp, only my full name typed in bold block letters across the front. Ethan Callahan. Beneath that, smaller but equally sterile font, "We're interested." I stared at it for a long moment, the weight of the words pressing into my chest like a familiar hand. Part curiosity, part dread. Back inside my apartment, the dull hum of the old refrigerator filled the silence. I ran my fingers along the envelope's sharp edge, briefly hesitating before tearing it open. A single sheet of high-quality paper slid out, perfectly centered text on stark white. "Dear Mr. Callahan, we are aware of your unique perceptual abilities and would like to extend an employment opportunity. Your condition is not a burden, it is a qualification. Further instructions will follow if you accept. Hatchet Biotech. No contact number, no office address, no signature." I rubbed my temple, already feeling the migraine coil itself inside my skull like a snake preparing to strike. I hadn't heard that name, Hatchet Biotech, since I was a teenager. My father used to mention it in hushed conversations with people who never stayed long in our house. Men in suits, women with notepads. Their eyes were always sharp and hungry. A faint ringing buzzed in my ears. I blinked and caught movement in the corner of my vision, the familiar trick my brain played, blending shadows into faces. The stain on the wallpaper looked like a twisted, smiling mouth. "Get a grip," I whispered. I slid the letter into the kitchen drawer and closed it carefully, as if shutting it away would somehow contain the growing unease inside me. Later that evening, while the sky outside faded into its dull winter gray, the phone rang. "Mr. Callahan?" A woman's voice. Calm, deliberate. "Yes," I answered, gripping the phone tighter. "My name is Teresa. I represent Hatchet Biotech. I trust you've received our invitation?" "I have," I said, my mouth dry, "but I wasn't expecting—" "There's little reason to hesitate," she interrupted smoothly. "We're fully aware of your medical history, Mr. Callahan. We understand your condition better than any physician you've consulted. That's precisely why you're an ideal candidate for this role." My heartbeat slowed unnaturally, as if something unseen was regulating it. "What exactly is the job?" "We'll discuss details in person. The work is highly confidential. You'll be compensated generously, and your participation will offer you an unprecedented chance to control your episodes." "Control?" I repeated. "Yes," Teresa said, her tone crisp. "This could give you your life back, Mr. Callahan." She offered a meeting, tomorrow, noon sharp, at a private address in the Midtown Industrial District. I barely slept that night. The familiar phantoms played against my walls like projected film reels, faces in the plaster, eyes blinking in the dark, twisting mouths, whispering things I couldn't quite make out. The medication I used to take dulled those images, but I'd weaned myself off nearly 6 months ago. After years of chemical numbness, I'd wanted to face the raw world again, but the raw world had teeth. By morning, I convinced myself this was at least worth hearing out. My bank account was drowning, my job prospects were non-existent, my condition made ordinary work impossible. The address led me to a nondescript 3-story building sandwiched between shuttered warehouses. No sign, no logo, just a keypad by a steel door. Before I could knock, the door buzzed open. Inside, the air smelled sterilized, like bleach mixed with something faintly metallic. I was led down a narrow corridor by a young man in a black suit who never introduced himself. His expression was a mask. Not unfriendly, not human either. We arrived at a glass-walled conference room where Teresa was already waiting. She stood when I entered, her smile perfectly symmetrical. She was strikingly average. Shoulder-length dark hair, sharp cheekbones, and pale blue eyes that lingered on mine just a beat too long. "Mr. Callahan," she greeted me, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." I shook it, surprised at how cold her skin was. "I don't believe I had much of a choice," I muttered. "There is always a choice," she said lightly, "but most people make the wrong one." She gestured for me to sit across from her. "There's no need to dance around pleasantries," Teresa continued, opening a slim black folder before her. Inside was my entire life. Medical charts, psychiatric evaluations, school transcripts, legal records, even documents I barely remembered signing at the St. Augustine Asylum during my adolescent years. "You've lived with your condition for 20 years, she said. "Chronic visual pareidolia, hyperactive pattern recognition, hallucinations, night terrors." I nodded stiffly. "You see things others don't," she pressed. "That makes you valuable." "Valuable to whom?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. "To us," she replied simply. "Hatchet Biotech is currently studying anomalies that intersect between visual perception and neurological distortions. We believe your natural condition gives you a particular sensitivity to certain external variables." "Variables?" "Variables. Entities," she said softly. "Entities that most people cannot see, but you might." The room felt colder. My pulse quickened. "You want to use my illness?" I whispered. "We want to give it purpose," Teresa corrected. "Controlled work, controlled environment. You'll be properly trained, well compensated, and most importantly, protected." I leaned back, forcing my breathing to steady. "And what's the catch?" "You will be required to discontinue all medications. Full cognitive clarity is necessary. We'll monitor you closely. The process has risks, of course, but nothing beyond what you already experience daily." I closed my eyes for a moment. In the darkness, familiar shapes curled at the edges of my vision, shadows forming fingers, faces, eyes. "How much does it pay?" Teresa slid a thin envelope across the table. I opened it, and my stomach turned at the figure written inside. It was absurd. More than I'd earned in 5 years combined. "When do I start?" I asked before my brain could stop my mouth. Teresa smiled again, wider this time. "Immediately." Outside, as I left the building, I caught a glimpse of Teresa standing behind the tinted glass. She watched me like a painting might, motionless, expression frozen. I wasn't even sure she blinked. The envelope weighed heavy in my pocket. I was in. The days following my agreement felt like I was sinking into warm water, unnatural, oddly comforting, and yet suffocating beneath the surface. The contract was finalized with disturbing ease. There were no drawn-out legal briefings, no mountains of paperwork. A few signatures. A non-disclosure agreement that read more like a government security clearance than an employment contract. And then came the medication purge. Teresa's final instruction had been crystal clear. No supplements, no stabilizers, no tranquilizer. You need your mind clean. The first 2 days were simple enough, at least physically. My hands only trembled slightly. The nightmares were standard fare. Faces in the walls, the usual whispering mouths under my bed. The third night, though, things changed. At 3:33 a.m. exactly, I woke abruptly. There was knocking. 3 gentle raps on my apartment door. Not loud, but deliberate. I lay frozen under the thin blanket, my breathing shallow. The knocking came again. 3 times. Measured. Polite. I didn't move. When the morning sun finally bled into the apartment through the dusty blinds, I found no one outside. No footprints. No disturbance on the thin layer of frost lining the doormat. I told myself it was a dream, that my brain was testing me, breaking old boundaries now that the meds were flushed out. But as the hours stretched forward, I began to feel something crawling beneath my skin, a humming anxiety that wasn't entirely my own. The following morning, Teresa's call came. "We're ready for your first evaluation, Mr. Callahan," she said. "You'll be picked up this afternoon." Her voice was unchanged, smooth, professional, like this was any ordinary HR process. A gray SUV arrived precisely at 2 p.m. The driver never introduced himself, never looked at me once. He wore dark glasses despite the overcast sky. I climbed into the back seat and watched the city dissolve into open countryside. The buildings grew sparse, the roads narrower, until the landscape transformed into rolling pines and empty fields. We drove for nearly 2 hours before reaching the outskirts of Black Pine Hollow, a name I only vaguely recognized from some half-forgotten childhood memory, a place my father once mentioned late at night when he thought I was asleep. The facility was hidden behind tall metal fencing. No signs, no guards, just a heavy automated gate that opened as we approached, like it had been waiting for us. Rows of prefabricated buildings dotted the compound, sterile in design, military in their precision. Several black vans were parked near one of the larger structures. Tents housed equipment I couldn't recognize, manned by people in gray uniforms moving with purpose but no urgency. My pulse quickened. Teresa stood waiting near the entrance, her pale blue eyes catching mine immediately. "Welcome to the field station," she said, motioning for me to follow her inside. "This will serve as your primary work site for the time being." We entered a long hallway lined with glass observation rooms. Inside some of them were sealed steel doors, blinking monitors, and walls covered in monitors displaying streams of data I couldn't decipher. "This is where we process the subjects after initial detection," Teresa explained, as if offering a tour to a visiting student. "Today, however, you'll begin exposure assessment." "Exposure?" I echoed. "Your condition allows you to see deviations others can't detect. We will test your sensitivity in controlled environments." She guided me into a preparation room where 2 technicians quickly fitted me with biometric monitors, heart rate sensors, a chest strap, gloves embedded with haptic feedback nodes. A lightweight headset was placed over my ears. It pulsed faintly against my skull. "Is all this necessary?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Highly," Teresa said. "We must observe not only what you see, but how you react." The final piece was a thin plastic wristband secured to my left arm. It vibrated faintly, as if syncing to my pulse. "Remember, Mr. Callahan," Teresa said, lowering her voice as she checked the monitors. "Observe, describe, but do not fixate. The moment you feel something unnatural, you tell me." "Unnatural?" I repeated, feeling my stomach twist. She offered a faint smile. "You'll know." With that, the technicians opened the final door, revealing a hallway that led into a single-family home. Perfectly ordinary at first glance, like any suburban home you'd find in any sleepy American town. Except it wasn't, because this house was built inside the facility itself. A full reconstruction meant for observation. I stepped inside slowly, my breath shallow. The lighting was dim but warm, artificial sunlight filtering in through fake windows. Furniture was arranged as if a family still lived here. Magazines on the coffee table, shoes by the front door, a framed family portrait on the wall, except the family in the photo had no faces. Their heads were featureless, smooth like porcelain dolls. The headset crackled in my ear. "Start your sweep, Mr. Callahan. Describe what you see." I moved through the living room carefully. The furniture was pristine, no dust, no signs of actual habitation. The silence was thick, pressing into my ears. Every creak of the floorboard sounded unnaturally loud. I see a couch, 2-seater, leather, burgundy, television on a wooden stand, picture frames, no facial features on the subjects. "Good," Teresa's voice whispered. "Continue." I entered the hallway next, pausing at the first bedroom. A child's room. Toys arranged neatly, an unmade bed. There, On the nightstand sat an old cassette player. I blinked hard. My hands trembled. The label read, Callahan, 1994. I stared, my throat dry. My birth year. The device whirred to life without me touching it. From the small speaker, a faint voice emerged. My father's voice, distorted but unmistakable. Don't trust their smiles, Ethan. If you see the second window. Static. The cassette clicked off. My chest constricted as my mind raced. Was this real? Or was my brain blending past and present again? The headset crackled. Mr. Callahan, is there an issue? I forced my voice steady. No, just a malfunctioning tape. Moving on. I turned away, trying to swallow my panic. But as I exited the bedroom, I caught a glimpse of something in the hallway mirror. A shadow just behind me, not mine. Something tall. Wrong. The reflection blinked with eyes that glowed faint blue, and it smiled. The reflection was gone by the time I turned around. I stood there in the hallway for several seconds, my breath held in my throat, half expecting something to lunge out from behind me, but the corridor was empty. The only sound was my own pulse drumming inside my ears. Teresa's voice crackled gently in my headset again. Mr. Callahan, status? I forced myself to breathe evenly, gripping the frame of the door to steady my shaking fingers. No visual anomalies. Continuing. It was a lie, but I didn't know how to explain what I had just seen, or if I had seen it at all. The mission continued. I moved deeper into the house, every creak of the floorboard sounding unnaturally loud under my boots. The kitchen was spotless, staged like a real family had lived here once. Fresh fruit sat in a bowl on the counter, wax replicas no doubt. Knives gleamed in a wooden block by the sink. The refrigerator hummed despite being disconnected. Even here, my mind played its tricks. For a moment, I swore I saw faces pressing out from behind the frosted glass of the fridge door. They dissolved as soon as I blinked. This kitchen, I spoke aloud for the recorder, appears fully staged, appliances inactive, fruit display artificial, no abnormal movement detected. Good, Teresa's voice replied, calm as ever. Proceed to the master bedroom. There was something eerie about how she delivered those instructions, as if we were walking through this house together. Yet I knew she was watching from somewhere far away, watching my every move. The master bedroom was at the end of the hall, behind a door that swung open silently under my hand. More carefully staged decor greeted me. A king-size bed perfectly made. 2 identical nightstands, pale beige curtains covering sealed windows. I paused at the dresser, noticing a single object out of place. A small framed photograph, face down. I picked it up slowly. The photo was old, worn at the edges, colors slightly faded. It showed a man and a young boy standing near a lake. The man's face was partially obscured by glare, but the boy's features were unmistakable. It was me. My stomach twisted into knots. I hadn't been to a lake like that in years. Or ever? My memory flickered, unreliable. My father's face, half obscured, stared back from the photo. At least I thought it was him. Describe, Teresa's voice prompted. A family photo, I said softly, my voice dry. The subjects are familiar. There was a brief pause on her end. Familiar in what way? I considered lying again, but something in me hesitated. It's me. And my father. Another silence. Continue, Mr. Callahan. The final room was the basement. I stood at the top of the staircase, staring into the darkness that spread out below me like a mouth, waiting to swallow me whole. My fingers hovered over the light switch. When I flipped it, the dim bulbs flickered weakly to life, casting elongated shadows along the concrete walls. The basement was mostly empty except for an old armchair, a rusted filing cabinet, and several large storage bins stacked near the far wall. But as I descended each step, the temperature seemed to drop, and I could feel the vibration of my pulse intensifying through the wristband monitor. As I reached the bottom, I heard it. Soft breathing. It wasn't mine. I froze, scanning the space with my eyes. The noise was faint, but steady, as though someone, or something, was positioned just beyond my field of vision. "Do you hear that, Mr. Callahan?" Teresa asked quietly in my ear. She heard it too. "Yes," I whispered. "Remain calm. Focus. Do not approach the anomaly. Just observe." The breathing grew louder as I turned slowly, my chest tightening with every breath. My eyes landed on the farthest corner of the room, where the shadows seemed unnaturally dense, and then I saw it. A silhouette, barely distinguishable from the darkness. Tall, thin, unmoving. Its head tilted slightly, as though studying me in return. 2 faint pinpoints of pale blue light glowed where its eyes should have been. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet locked to the floor. "Describe, Mr. Callahan," Teresa urged again, her voice sounding distant now, warped and detached. My mouth worked, struggling to form words. "There's someone, something in the far corner. Blue eyes, very faint glow." The being didn't move. It simply watched. The silence between us grew unbearable, like a stretched rubber band on the verge of snapping. Suddenly, the lights above me flickered twice, casting the room into momentary darkness. When the bulbs flared back to life, the corner was empty. The breathing stopped. The only sound left was my racing heartbeat pounding inside my skull. "Subject has vanished," I finally managed. "Well done, Mr. Callahan," Teresa said softly. "That concludes your first evaluation." As I climbed the basement steps, my legs trembled beneath me. As though they didn't belong to me anymore, I was escorted back through the compound by another silent staffer, my equipment carefully detached and cataloged. Teresa appeared again near the exit, clipboard in hand, offering that same unblinking smile. "You handled yourself well," she said. "Most first-time contractors don't make it through exposure without incident." "That wasn't a hallucination, was it?" I asked quietly, my throat dry. Her smile never wavered. "Your perceptions are accurate, Mr. Callahan. That's why you're valuable to us." The SUV was waiting outside to take me back. As I climbed in, I couldn't shake the sensation that I wasn't alone. Not in the car, not in my mind, not in my body. During the drive home, I kept my gaze fixed on the rearview mirror. Not for traffic, but for something else. Something I felt was watching from just behind my seat, hovering in that thin space where light couldn't quite reach. For the first time since I signed the contract, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. The days that followed blurred into one another like smeared ink on cheap paper. My sleep grew thinner, my dreams more vivid. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those pale blue eyes blinking at me from the shadows, always watching, always smiling. At first, I told myself this was part of the adjustment. Teresa had warned me that discontinuing the medication would heighten my perception, that my mind would stabilize after initial exposure. But nothing about this felt like stabilization. 3 days after my first mission, I was summoned again. This time, the SUV didn't pick me up from home. Instead, I was instructed to take a rideshare to a nondescript office building on the far edge of Albuquerque. The driver, an older man with sunken eyes, didn't speak the entire ride. His hands trembled slightly as he drove. The office lobby was empty when I arrived. No receptionist, no security. Just a single elevator waiting, with its doors already open, humming softly as if impatient. As I stepped inside, the doors slid shut behind me with an unsettling smoothness. No buttons, no floor numbers. The elevator simply began moving on its own, descending into whatever lay beneath. When the doors finally opened, I found myself in a long, sterile hallway. The air was colder here, dense like something heavy had been compressed into the atmosphere itself. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead as if struggling to maintain composure. Teresa was waiting for me at the far end, her smile as perfect and artificial as ever. "Welcome back, Mr. Callahan," she greeted. "Back?" I repeated. "I don't remember ever being here before." Her smile twitched just for a moment. "Of course not." We walked side by side down the corridor, passing doors labeled with alphanumeric codes: B217, B218, B219. From behind one of them, I heard something that sounded like scratching, or breathing, or both. I didn't ask. Teresa led me into a control room filled with monitors, wires, and half a dozen technicians wearing matching gray uniforms. Each monitor displayed live camera feeds from multiple locations, most of them interior rooms staged like suburban homes, almost identical to the house from my first mission. "You're adjusting remarkably well," Teresa said as she handed me a headset similar to the one from before. "Today's evaluation will take place under a slightly different protocol." "Different how?" "This time, you won't be entering a constructed environment. Instead, we'll be observing a live location, a real residence, under investigation. You'll monitor remotely and describe any anomalies you observe." My pulse quickened. Remote observation. Somehow that felt worse. She gestured to one of the larger screens as it flickered to life. The image stabilized on a modest 2-story house, likely somewhere in the outskirts of town. A timestamp in the corner marked the live feed, 3:12 a.m. "This residence has been flagged for potential activity," Teresa explained. "No physical agents will be entering at this time. You're our first observer." The camera angle shifted to the living room inside, ordinary in every way, yet the longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. The lighting was too soft, the shadows too sharp. I adjusted the headset as instructed. The sensors around my temples hummed faintly. "Describe what you see," Teresa prompted. "Living room, neutral decor, beige carpet, leather armchair, family portraits, again no facial features." The camera slowly panned across the room as if controlled by an invisible operator. My stomach tightened. "There's movement," I whispered. "Where?" Teresa asked calmly. "Near the back window. The curtains. They're swaying, but there's no draft." The image zoomed in automatically, revealing the window. For a moment, nothing appeared unusual. Then, slowly, a figure materialized behind the sheer fabric. A tall, thin silhouette, barely distinguishable except for its glowing blue eyes peeking through. I felt my breath hitch. "It's there," I said. "Same as before. Tall, thin, eyes glowing faint blue." The technicians typed furiously at their keyboards, reading data I couldn't see. "Stay focused," Teresa said. "Keep observing." The camera zoomed closer. The figure behind the curtain didn't move, but somehow, it felt like it was inching closer, growing taller. Its form stretched unnaturally, like elastic pulled just past the point of breaking. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. No transition, no blur. One frame it existed, the next it didn't. "Subject lost visual contact," I reported. Teresa nodded without looking away from the screen. "Excellent, let's proceed." The next feed switched on. This time, the camera was stationed in a child's bedroom. Pink wallpaper, stuffed animals carefully lined up along the shelves. A crib sat in the corner. I immediately felt nauseous. On the wall across from the crib hung a mirror. As the camera zoomed in, my heart nearly stopped. In the mirror's reflection, the same figure stood closer now. Blue eyes gleaming like tiny distant stars. "Behind the crib," I choked. "It's inside the mirror." The room itself showed nothing unusual. Only the reflection revealed the intruder. "Stay calm," Teresa instructed, though her voice had tightened slightly. Suddenly, the feed glitched, lines of static cutting horizontally across the screen. For a split second, the reflection changed. The figure's head rotated in an unnatural, jerking motion, its elongated mouth widening into an impossible grin. Then the feed cut entirely. The monitors went dark. The technicians whispered frantically among themselves, but Teresa remained still, her expression unreadable. I yanked off the headset, my skin clammy, my hands trembling. "What the hell was that?" I demanded. Teresa finally turned to me, her voice eerily calm. "Confirmation." "Of what?" "That you're seeing exactly what you're supposed to see." Her words sank into me like needles. I realized then, I wasn't being tested to prove I could see these things. I was being used because they already knew I could. The lights flickered briefly above us. For the first time since stepping into this place, I noticed Teresa blink. Or at least, I thought she did. But for that brief instant, her eyes gleamed faintly blue under the flicker of fluorescent light. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I couldn't, but because I was terrified of what I might see if I closed my eyes. And somewhere, far away or maybe just beneath the surface of my thoughts, I could feel them watching. Always. Lucas was gone. Officially, they said he'd been transferred to another department. The explanation was delivered with a rehearsed smoothness that barely disguised the hollowness beneath it. No one in the facility spoke of him after that. His workstation was scrubbed clean. His name was erased from the directory, as though he'd never existed. But I remembered him. He was the only one who looked me in the eye after my first exposure. The only one who, just before we parted, had slipped a small flash drive into my jacket pocket without a word. I didn't open it right away. Fear held me hostage for days. But fear can only coil inside you for so long before it has nowhere left to go. The file contained only one video, grainy surveillance footage, timestamp 16 years ago. The image flickered and stabilized on a laboratory almost identical to the one I'd seen beneath the facility. A man stood in the center of the frame, partially turned away from the camera. Even distorted by poor resolution, I recognized the shape of his shoulders, the way his hand rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit I inherited. It was my father. He appeared younger, healthier. His voice, though muffled by the low-quality microphone, carried the same worn-out weight I remembered. Subject number 13 showing instability under prolonged exposure. A second figure entered frame. A boy, young, frightened, hooked to monitors. Me. My stomach clenched as I watched my younger self glance nervously toward my father. The video ended abruptly as alarms blared and the screen dissolved into static. I stared at the monitor long after the file ended, my pulse thudding in my ears. They had been using me from the beginning. I was never recruited because I was useful. I was bred for this. The questions swirled endlessly. What were they exposing me to back then? How much of my so-called illness was planted? How many of my memories had been manipulated? The next morning, as I sat motionless in my apartment, the doorbell rang. 3 short chimes, deliberate. I tensed instantly. Every instinct told me to ignore it, but curiosity always overpowers caution when you've already fallen too far. When I opened the door, no one was there, just a plain manila envelope resting on the doormat, my name typed cleanly across the front. I brought it inside with shaking hands. Inside were photocopies, dozens of pages, medical files, psychological assessments, St. Augustine Asylum records, but none of them were recent. These were old, dating back almost 2 decades. Each document detailed my sessions, my treatments, the medication trials. But the real horror lay in the footnotes, coded references to a program labeled Project Mirror. As I flipped through the pages, one sentence stood out, circled in red pen. Subject shows high pareidotic susceptibility, prime candidate for reflection synchronization experiments. I dropped the papers as my stomach turned. The words spun in my head like vultures circling a dying thing. I wasn't sick. I was altered. A knock came again, but not at the door this time. At the window. 3 taps. Slow. I spun toward it, pulse hammering, but found nothing beyond the frosted glass. Just the faint reflection of my own face, pale and wide-eyed. For a moment, though, my reflection didn't move when I did. I stumbled backward, breath ragged. The ringing phone snapped me out of it. I grabbed the receiver, expecting Teresa's smooth voice. But it wasn't her. The voice was cracked, strained, like someone speaking through a throat filled with broken glass. "You're not supposed to know, Ethan," it rasped. My throat dried. "Who is this?" Static hissed for several seconds before the voice returned. "They're already inside. Don't trust the reflections." Click. The line went dead. The next hours passed in a daze. Every reflection around me, windows, mirrors, even the black screen of the television, felt like a threat. I draped towels and blankets over every reflective surface in my apartment, but it didn't help. The feeling of being watched never left. As dusk settled, my phone buzzed again. This time a text. No number displayed. Black Pine Archive, basement level, Marcia Kendrick. I read it over and over, my mind racing. I didn't know who had sent it, but whoever they were, they knew what was happening, and they wanted me to know more. The Black Pine Public Archive was a small, half-forgotten building on the edge of the town's old industrial district. I arrived after midnight, slipping inside through an unlocked side door. The air was thick with dust and age, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering weakly. The basement stairs groaned beneath my weight as I descended. Marcia Kendrick. I remembered the name from one of the older files. She was one of the last surviving civilian witnesses to an early containment breach tied to Project Mirror. The basement was lined with rows of old filing cabinets, most of them rusted shut. But one cabinet at the far end had been left slightly ajar, as though someone had been here recently. Inside was a thick leather-bound journal, brittle and stained with time. The name Marcia Kendrick was etched faintly across the cover. As I opened it, my breath caught. The pages weren't written chronologically. Some entries were backward, others upside down. Scrawled symbols I didn't recognize filled the margins, but certain phrases repeated throughout, again and again, circled with increasing desperation. The blue eyes always return. Do not face your own reflection after 3:33 a.m. One of them wears your face. My head spun. The sound of movement behind me made me freeze. I turned, expecting to see someone standing there in the dim light, but there was no one, only the faint echo of breathing that wasn't mine. The breathing grew louder. At first I thought it might be my own, a trick of the mind, an echo in the old basement air. But as I stood frozen in place, my lungs tightened, and I realized it was coming from somewhere behind the rows of filing cabinets. Soft, wet, like something inhaling through torn lungs. I stepped backwards slowly, clutching Marcia Kendrick's journal tight against my chest. The dim fluorescent light above flickered again, casting the narrow aisles into momentary darkness. In that brief blackout, I saw movement. A tall shape, unnaturally thin, gliding silently between the cabinets. The lights snapped back on, and the space was empty again. My pulse hammered against my rib cage like a trapped animal. A cold draft snaked across my neck. Something was behind me now, closer. I forced myself to move, to break the paralysis that threatened to swallow me whole. My legs responded reluctantly, as though wading through thick water. I turned toward the staircase, toward whatever shred of safety might exist above ground. The stairs seemed impossibly far away. Then the lights cut out completely. Darkness devoured the basement. The only sound left was that wet breathing, now just inches behind me. I ran. My footsteps echoed sharply against the concrete as I stumbled up the narrow staircase, clutching the journal like it was a lifeline. The breathing followed, steady and patient. When I burst through the basement door into the main archive hall, the lights flickered back to life, casting a pale glow over rows of untouched records. But I didn't stop running until I was back outside, gulping in the cold night air under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. For several minutes, I stood there, shaking. Then my phone buzzed again. You weren't supposed to find her notes. Leave Black Pine now. No number, no source, just the words. But I couldn't leave, not yet. The puzzle pieces had begun to shift into place, and even though I didn't yet see the full picture, I could feel its monstrous shape pressing through the surface of my mind. The journal contained more than just paranoid ramblings. The deeper I read, the more patterns emerged. A crude map of how they operated. Not the organization, the entities. Marcia had written of people vanishing overnight, their homes left untouched except for one thing. Every mirror in the house shattered inward, as though something had exited through them. She described sightings of pale blue eyes appearing first in reflections, always watching, testing, studying. She spoke of people who smiled too wide, who blinked too little, who spoke with voices slightly detached from the movement of their mouths. She called them mimics. Her final entries descended into barely legible scrawl. "They're inside the ones who survived. Some of us were infected at birth. I saw what they did to his son. The experiment never ended." I closed the journal with trembling hands. His son. Me. I barely noticed the tears rolling down my cheeks as the horrible clarity sank into my bones. My condition wasn't an accident of neurology. It was exposure conditioning. A long, controlled infection. And Hatchet Biotech was the caretaker of that infection. I was never sick. I was property. The thought filled me with a numb kind of rage. One that sat too deep to scream, too cold to shake. As the first light of dawn began bleeding across the horizon, I returned to my apartment and tried to make sense of what I was supposed to do now. Escape? Expose them? Hide? All of it felt impossible. My phone rang again, this time a video call. The caller ID simply read, "Unknown." Against every instinct screaming inside me, I answered. The screen remained black for a moment, then static, and finally a face appeared. Teresa. Except it wasn't entirely her. Her features were slightly off, too symmetrical, her eyes a shade too pale, her smile stretched just past the natural point. It was as if someone had sculpted her from memory, but failed to correct the small details humans never consciously notice. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, voice perfectly calm. I didn't respond. "You've been quite busy," she continued, "but you shouldn't be reading old files. They're inaccurate." I clenched my jaw. "Lucas didn't transfer, did he?" A pause. "He was no longer useful," she replied. The words hit like a hammer, blunt and final. "You used me," I whispered. "We preserved you," Teresa said, her head tilting slightly. "Your perception makes you compatible, necessary. That's why your father brought you into the program. He understood what you could become." "My father?" My voice cracked. The smile on her face widened unnaturally. "He's still with us, Ethan, in a way." The video feed began to distort, warping her features further until her eyes glowed faint blue, just like the thing in the mirror. Her voice layered itself into multiple tones, some higher, some impossibly low. "We are very proud of you." The call disconnected. I stared at the blank screen, heart pounding. Every mirror in the apartment felt like it was vibrating now, humming softly. I stood slowly, moving toward the bathroom, where the largest mirror hung over the sink. My reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't quite right. The mouth moved a fraction too late. The blink came half a second too slow. The eyes, faintly glowing, and then it smiled. Not mine. The lights flickered. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut, my breath shallow, my skin clammy. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but where could I go? They were everywhere. Inside reflections. Inside me. My phone buzzed one final time. Sector 7. Basement access. Final truth. The message vanished before I could read it twice. I knew then that I didn't have a choice. Either I faced them completely, or I would lose myself to whatever was already trying to replace me. The entrance to Sector 7 wasn't locked. That alone should have terrified me more than anything I'd seen so far. The security gate hummed softly as I approached, the reinforced metal doors parting with a slow mechanical groan, revealing a sterile concrete corridor that disappeared into dim fluorescence. No guards, no cameras, no alarms. Either they wanted me here, or they didn't care if I came in. The facility had always been vast, but Sector 7 lived below it, beneath everything I thought I understood. This place was older, colder. The air smelled of dust, ammonia, and something faintly metallic, like the memory of blood. I stepped carefully, each footfall echoing down the long hallway. My breath came in shallow bursts, my pulse loud inside my skull. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with irregular rhythm, throwing brief shadows against the bare concrete walls. As I moved deeper, I passed doors labeled only with numbers. B71, B72, B73, thick, windowless slabs of steel bolted into the walls, silent witnesses to whatever lived or had lived behind them. I wasn't supposed to be here. Every instinct screamed it. But instinct hadn't protected me before. The only way out was through. A low vibration crawled under my skin as I reached the end of the main corridor. A reinforced door loomed before me, slightly ajar, as if inviting. Beyond it, the air shifted. The first thing I noticed was the hum. Not mechanical, something else, like breathing. The room beyond the door was massive, an underground hangar of sorts. Fluorescent tubes buzzed overhead in long, flickering lines. Glass containment chambers lined the far wall, arranged like an abandoned gallery. Each chamber contained something. Bodies? Not exactly human. I approached the first chamber cautiously. Inside, suspended in a thick, translucent fluid, floated what once might have been a man. His skin was pale and thin, veins mapped like highways beneath the surface. The head was partially deformed, elongated, the mouth stretched wide into a frozen grin. But what held me were the eyes, faintly glowing blue. I moved from one chamber to the next, each one housing a different variation. Some smaller, some grotesquely tall, some missing limbs, some grown additional ones, but all with those same pale, watching eyes. A showcase of failures, or maybe progress. At the end of the row stood the final chamber. Larger, more heavily reinforced than the others. The fluid inside was darker, murkier, as if something struggled to stay hidden beneath its surface. As I peered closer, movement rippled through the liquid. Two glowing orbs opened slowly, fixing directly on me. My stomach clenched. The thing inside was still alive. The headset crackled inside my jacket. Something I hadn't even realized was still active. A voice broke through. "Teresa, you've gone further than most, Ethan." Her voice was calm, but it carried an edge now. Less patient, more resigned. "You knew I'd come here," I whispered. "We counted on it." Her image flashed across one of the monitors above. Her face once again disturbingly symmetrical, her eyes unnaturally bright. The real Teresa, or whatever she had become, was likely nowhere nearby. This was just another projection, another layer. "You could have told me the truth from the beginning," I said. "You weren't ready for the truth," she replied. "Even now you barely are." I looked back toward the final chamber, where the thing inside shifted again, its long fingers unfurling like branches. "What is this?" my voice cracked. "This is your inheritance." Her words hit harder than I expected. "The project was never about curing you," she continued. "Your father knew the risks. He agreed to them. The integration began when you were a child. We prepared you, trained your perception, hardened your mind to withstand what most would collapse under." "The experiments?" I choked. "The treatments?" "St. Augustine. That wasn't therapy?" "No," she said softly. "It was conditioning." My mind reeled, trying to absorb the enormity of it. I wasn't simply a victim, I was the product. "You're compatible," Teresa continued, her voice oddly soothing now. "Few are. The others, they break. But you see them, you endure them. You are precisely what they've needed." My legs weakened beneath me. I braced myself against the edge of the chamber, trying to steady my spinning head. "I never agreed to this." "You never had to." I squeezed my eyes shut, struggling to block out her voice, her face, the shifting form behind the glass. When I opened them again, my reflection stared back at me in the chamber's polished surface. But it wasn't my reflection. The eyes glowed faintly blue. The mouth curled into a twisted grin that I wasn't making. The reflection tilted its head, watching me, mimicking. Inside my chest, my heart pounded like it was trying to escape. My breathing shortened into rapid gasps. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing, when something new caught my attention. An old, dust-covered clipboard lying on a nearby workstation. I snatched it up. The top page was a roster, Project Mirror, Phase 1 survivors. There were only 2 names listed. Subject 1, Dr. Franklin Callahan. Subject 13, Ethan Callahan. My father. And me. I felt the bile rise in my throat. The loud hum behind me pulsed harder now. I turned instinctively. The chamber was empty. The fluid inside rippled, but the entity was gone. The breathing returned, closer now, not mechanical, not ambient. Behind me, the breathing circled me, slow, deliberate, like something studying prey that no longer had the strength to run. I spun wildly, my back pressing against one of the glass chambers as my eyes scanned the cavernous hangar. The creature was no longer contained. It was free, and I was alone with it. The overhead lights dimmed, flickered, then cut out entirely. Only the soft hum of the facility remained, accompanied by that steady, rhythmic breathing, growing louder. I reached instinctively into my pocket, pulling out the small flashlight I'd carried since my second assignment. Its narrow beams sliced through the darkness, quivering as my hand trembled. For a moment, there was nothing but the thick silence of the room, and then, movement. In the far corner, just barely illuminated, something shifted, limbs too long, spine arched unnaturally. The creature hunched low, its head cocked at an impossible angle as it peered toward the beam of light. Its face, or what was left of one, was stretched thin like damp cloth pulled tight over bone. Its eyes blinked, glowing faint blue in the darkness. It smiled, the same twisted grin I'd seen reflected in the chamber glass. I staggered back, but my body refused full control. My legs threatened to collapse under the weight of my own panic. "Stay calm." Teresa's voice buzzed suddenly in my ear, her tone clinical, almost bored. "Observe, Ethan. This is still part of your evaluation." "You're watching this?" I gasped, breath hitching. "You knew it escaped?" "Of course," she replied smoothly. "We have reached the final threshold. Either your conditioning holds, or it doesn't. You're using me as bait. You were always bait, Ethan. From the moment you were born." The creature moved again, dragging one elongated limb along the floor with a sickening scrape of bone against concrete. Its other arm extended toward me, fingers thin and long, twitching like antennae tasting the air. My chest tightened as every instinct inside me screamed to run. But where? The main exit was behind the creature. Every door I'd passed on the way down had sealed automatically. "Don't look directly into its eyes," Teresa's voice whispered. "You know the rule." I snapped my gaze downward, forcing myself to focus on the creature's feet, grotesquely arched and elongated, each toe ending in a sharp black nail tapping lightly against the floor. My breath quickened. It inched closer. The wristband on my arm pulsed harder, as if monitoring not just my vitals but my willpower, feeding real-time data to whatever team sat comfortably behind monitors far above me. "You're doing well, Ethan," Teresa said softly. "Better than your predecessors. That's why you're special." My free hand clenched into a fist. Predecessors. There had been others. Lucas. The others locked in glass tanks. All failures. All broken. I wasn't like them. I wouldn't break. The creature hissed softly, swaying its head side to side, searching for any lapse in my concentration. Its movements were unsettlingly precise, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. "You feel it, don't you?" Teresa continued. "The resonance, the synchronization. That's what this has always been about. Harmony between perception and host. You're trying to turn me into one of them," I whispered through clenched teeth. "Not turn, Ethan," she corrected. "Merge." The word hung in the stale air like a toxin. The creature lunged suddenly, fast, fluid. I dove sideways, narrowly avoiding its grasp. My flashlight tumbled from my grip, skidding across the floor, its beam spinning wildly as it landed. Now mostly blind, I scrambled toward one of the workstations. My fingers fumbled across the metal surface, searching for anything that could serve as a weapon. My hand landed on a metal rod, part of the chamber maintenance equipment. The creature shrieked, a sound halfway between a scream and a mechanical screech, deafening and primal. The rod trembled in my grip as I swung it toward the sound. I connected with something solid. The impact sent a shock through my arm, and the creature recoiled, its shriek dissolving into wet, gurgling growls. For a moment, I had space. The monitors lining the far wall flared to life again, this time unprompted. Teresa's face filled every screen. Her smile was wider now, almost inhuman. "You cannot fight what's already inside you, Ethan," she said. "This has always been the endgame. You were designed for this, the host and the reflection becoming one." "No," I growled, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm not your experiment." "You were never anything else," she whispered. The creature advanced again, slower this time, its mouth stretching impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. From somewhere deep within its chest, a second face began to press outward. A grotesque, malformed mimic of my own. I realized then what this truly was. It wasn't just trying to kill me. It was trying to replace me. That's what the others were. Lucas, the failed subjects, all consumed and duplicated, perfect reflections, devoid of their original selves. If I faltered, if I stared too long, it would wear my skin and walk free, indistinguishable from the man I used to be. My breath steadied. I gripped the rod tighter. The creature lunged again, and this time, I was ready. I ducked under its outstretched arms, driving the rod upward with everything I had. The sharp edge pierced under its jaw, forcing a choked gurgle from its throat. The blue glow in its eyes flickered. It spasmed violently, limbs thrashing, but I didn't release my grip. I twisted the rod, forcing the thing backward into one of the empty chambers behind it. Its body slammed into the glass with a sickening crunch. With one desperate surge of strength, I smashed my boot into the chamber controls. The containment system hissed to life, reinforced restraints snapping forward, clamping around the creature's twisted frame. The chamber sealed shut, flooding again with thick containment fluid. The creature thrashed once more, then fell still, suspended in murky liquid like its predecessors. The monitors flashed briefly, error codes dancing across Teresa's frozen face. Then silence. The breathing stopped. I stumbled back, chest heaving, drenched in sweat. For now, I had survived. But I knew this was only temporary. The true battle was still coming. And somewhere, far above, Teresa was. The silence inside Sector 7 was heavier than before. It wasn't relief. It wasn't victory. It was the kind of silence that arrives right before something worse begins. I stood there, staring at the containment chamber where the creature floated, still twitching faintly beneath the viscous fluid. Its pale face, now locked into place, still bore that twisted smile. My smile, or at least what it had intended to make my smile. I should have felt triumph, but all I felt was dread. The monitors flickered again, the fluorescent lights above humming unevenly. Error messages continued scrolling across the terminals, each one flashing new codes I couldn't decipher. But Teresa's face no longer appeared. That was what unnerved me the most. She wasn't watching now, or she didn't need to. I took a moment to gather my breath, wiping the sweat and grime from my face. My body ached from the struggle, muscles still trembling from the adrenaline. But somewhere beneath all of that was something far worse, a slow, creeping sense of violation. Whatever this thing was, it hadn't simply tried to kill me. It had tried to overwrite me. I wasn't dealing with some creature in the dark. I was dealing with a system built for replacement. The clipboard still lay on the workstation where I had dropped it earlier, the roster staring up at me like a confession, scrawled into the universe itself. Subject 1, Dr. Franklin Callahan. Subject 13, Ethan Callahan. My father. My blood. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to breathe. Rage warred with horror inside my gut. My entire life, Every broken fragment of my mind, every vision I'd endured, every twisted hallucination I'd tried to medicate away, had all been carefully orchestrated by men like my father, by people like Teresa. I wasn't a victim of misfortune. I was a manufactured survivor. The hum of the power grid shifted subtly. A distant thump reverberated through the walls, mechanical doors opening somewhere further below. They weren't done. Whatever happened here wasn't isolated to me. I had only scratched the surface. I grabbed the clipboard and pressed forward, deeper into Sector 7's restricted zones. The corridor narrowed into a service tunnel, dim emergency lighting guiding my way. Pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping condensation that echoed like faint footsteps in the distance. As I walked, faint voices began to bleed through the static in my headset. Not commands, not warnings. Whispers, fragments of sentences layered over each other like overlapping radio signals. Host compatible. Stabilization incomplete. Reflection breach threshold approaching. Subject 13 remains viable. My skin crawled. They weren't just observing me anymore. They were talking about me, planning me. I rounded a final corner and entered what looked like an observation hub. Banks of monitors covered every wall, displaying live feeds from countless rooms, other containment cells, old testing chambers, interview rooms. And then I saw him. My father. Or at least, something that wore his face. The footage was grainy, time-stamped from years ago. He sat calmly in an interview chamber, wires sneaking into his veins, monitors tracking every heartbeat. His expression was placid. A man who had once knelt beside my childhood bed, reading stories while I drifted into drug-induced sleep, now sat in a sterile room while men in suits studied him like an exhibit. The screen labeled him clearly. Subject blue. His eyes flickered faint blue. I stumbled back from the monitor, bile rising in my throat. He hadn't disappeared. They had integrated him. The realization hit like a hammer. My father hadn't sacrificed himself for some noble experiment. He had offered himself, willingly, to build this, to build me. A soft mechanical chime interrupted my spiraling thoughts. One of the side doors hissed open automatically. Beyond it, a narrow platform extended into a sealed glass dome. An isolation chamber far more advanced than anything else. At the center of that dome sat a single chair, and in that chair, tethered by countless wires, tubes, and monitors, was my father. Alive. Or something like him. His face was older than I remembered, but his features were unmistakable. He looked peaceful, almost serene, eyes closed as if lost in sleep. Pulses of blue light traveled through the tubes, coursing into his veins like liquid electricity. I stepped closer, my breath caught somewhere between rage and heartbreak. "Dad," I whispered, unsure if I even meant it anymore. His eyes fluttered open. The moment they locked onto mine, I froze. The faint blue glow swirled within his pupils, calm, steady, cold. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, his lips moved. He said softly. His voice was human, but hollow, like something reciting words it had been programmed to say. "You did well to make it this far." My fists clenched at my sides. "You did this to me." He smiled gently. "I prepared you." I shook my head. "You turned me into them." "No," he said. "I saved you from breaking." His words were matter of fact, as though this was a conversation we had rehearsed many times. "You don't understand," he continued. "The reflection always takes what is weak. You were never weak, but you were incomplete. I made sure you could withstand the merge." My voice cracked. "Merge with what?" He tilted his head. "The others." The monitors pulsed around us as the systems reacted to our interaction. Medical data streamed rapidly. Neural feedback spiked. Somewhere overhead, alarms briefly flickered before falling silent again. "You still have a choice, Ethan," my father whispered. "The transition is not finished, but soon it will be. You can embrace it willingly, or you can break like the others did." I stared at him, every instinct inside me twisting with revulsion and horror. Somewhere deep beneath the grief, I finally understood what Teresa meant when she said I was compatible. They didn't want to replace me. They wanted to complete me. I took a single step back from the glass, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I spoke the only truth I had left. I'm not like you. I wasn't dealing with a parasite, I was dealing with a blueprint, a slow infection of identity, one that had been inside me long before I stepped into Sector 7, long before Hatchet Biotech even offered me the job, maybe long before I ever understood what my condition really was. And now I understood what Teresa meant when she said I was compatible. I wasn't just chosen, I was cultivated. The journal, the files, the experiments, all of it pointed to the same horrifying conclusion. The Project Mirror wasn't meant to fight these entities. It was designed to facilitate them, to breed hosts that could carry these things across the threshold between their world and ours. Hosts like me. The breathing that had haunted me all my life was never mine. It was theirs. My knees weakened and I stumbled toward one of the workstations to steady myself. The monitors continued blinking error messages as if mocking my growing realization. One screen glitched, revealing a single still frame buried beneath the distorted static. It was my father. He stood in one of the early containment chambers, surrounded by the research team, with his palm pressed flat against the thick glass. His face was thinner than I remembered, worn, but his eyes still held that hollow determination I knew all too well. Under the image, a label blinked. Subject 1, Dr. Franklin Callahan. Integration phase successful. I stared, throat dry, unable to look away. So he hadn't died during the early experiments like they told me. He had become one of them. I wasn't following in his footsteps. I was designed to complete what he couldn't finish. The headset in my jacket suddenly crackled to life again, weak and fragmented, more like a whisper than speech. You're almost there, Ethan. Teresa's voice was faint now, distant, like an echo trapped inside my skull. The final sequence is ready. I tore the headset from my ear, throwing it onto the ground, but her words still rang inside my head as if she didn't need the device anymore, as if she was already inside. I needed to get out. I stumbled back down the corridor, retracing my steps through Sector 7. The security systems remained disabled, doors wide open like some twisted invitation. I passed the other sealed chambers again, rows of failures still floating in their tanks. And yet, as I moved, I realized the chambers weren't entirely still anymore. Some of the entities inside were moving, twitching, shuddering gently beneath the liquid, their pale blue eyes fluttering open, one by one, watching me. They were waking up. My breath quickened. Ahead, I saw the elevator, the one that had brought me here, still sitting idle, with its doors cracked open like a yawning mouth. But just as I stepped forward, the floor beneath my boots vibrated, soft at first, then stronger. The power grid was rebooting. The entire facility was coming back online. One by one, containment warnings flashed red across the wall-mounted panels as klaxons began to wail softly in the distance. Containment breach, B71, B72, B73. I didn't wait to hear the rest. I sprinted for the elevator, slamming my palm against the control panel. The doors hesitated for a heartbeat before sealing shut, and the lift lurched upward. As the elevator climbed, I stared at my reflection in the polished chrome panel. But it wasn't right. The delay in movement, the half-beat lag between my blink and its echo, the faint twitch of a smile that never fully left the corner of its mouth. I squeezed my eyes shut. Not now, not here. I couldn't lose myself yet. The elevator doors slid open at the main level, revealing the upper research facility. Eerily quiet, as if abandoned in haste. Documents littered the floor, chairs tipped over, monitors flashing error codes. They were evacuating. Even the staff knew this place was lost. The front entrance loomed ahead, its reinforced gates unlatched and wide open, letting in the pale morning light. I staggered toward it, lungs burning, every nerve in my body on fire. And yet, somewhere behind me, I could still hear the faint whisper of breathing. The entities were free now. Their prison had only been temporary. Once outside, I collapsed onto the cold pavement, gasping for air. The forest bordering the facility stretched out ahead, endless rows of black pines swaying gently under the gray sky. But I wasn't safe, not even close. My phone buzzed again. I knew better than to answer, but I did. The screen displayed no caller ID, just the symbol I'd seen stamped on the original Hatchet Biotech files. A perfect circle, bisected with a jagged vertical slash. Teresa's voice whispered through the speaker, softer than ever now, almost maternal. "This was never about the facility, Ethan." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. "What is it about then?" My voice trembled. "Survival," she said. "They don't want to destroy us. They want to wear us." Static crackled and her voice shifted, splitting into layers again. Some human, some not, and you're still their finest host. The call cut off. I stared out at the pines, realizing with cold clarity that this wasn't over. It had never even really begun. The infection wasn't contained to Sector 7. It was loose now, and part of it was already inside me. The sun rose, but it didn't feel like morning. The light filtering through the pines seemed thinner, paler, as though diluted by something in the air I couldn't see. Or maybe I was simply seeing the world differently now, through eyes that no longer fully belonged to me. For hours, I wandered deeper into the woods bordering Sector 7, my legs barely carrying my weight. My mind churned in endless loops, replaying my father's words, Teresa's voice, the flickering monitors, the breathing in the darkness, the merge, the integration, the reflection waiting beneath my skin. Even now I could feel it, subtle, like an itch inside my skull. Not a voice exactly, but a presence, a second pulse beneath my heartbeat, humming in perfect rhythm. Waiting. "You're compatible," Teresa had said. No matter how far I ran, I was bringing it with me. The first storm clouds gathered by late afternoon. Distant thunder rolled across the mountains like some ancient, restless thing waking beneath the ground. The wind whispered through the trees in strange cadences that almost sounded like words. It was then, standing among the pines, that I noticed the figure watching me. At first, I thought it was another hallucination, another trick of the light, but as I moved, the figure remained, tall, still, head slightly tilted as if studying me, its eyes, pale blue, glowing softly even beneath the dim light. The reflection, but this time it wasn't behind glass or lurking in shadows, it was fully here. I staggered backward, breath catching in my throat. The thing didn't move toward me, it didn't have to, because I felt the shift inside me, like a magnet pulling from within, responding to its presence. The hum in my blood grew louder, harmonizing with the storm brewing above. We were linked now, and it knew. Suddenly, the wind tore through the clearing with a sharp, violent gust, and the figure vanished between the trees, its pale glow dissolving like mist. I collapsed to my knees. The forest wasn't safe. The isolation wasn't helping. If I stayed out here much longer, I wouldn't be running from them, I would be running into them. I needed answers, and there was only one place left that might hold them: the Central Hatchet Biotech facility, the one that started all of this. The real nerve center wasn't buried underground like Sector 7. It stood quietly along the Black Pine Industrial Corridor, disguised as a pharmaceutical research lab, its public records sanitized and legitimate enough to keep government eyes away. They had always known no one would dig too deep. By nightfall, I made my way along the back service road, keeping to the tree line. There were no guards anymore, no fences. Whatever protocols had existed here were long abandoned now. The front entrance stood wide open, as though expecting me. The facility inside was pristine in a way Sector 7 never was. Marble floors, sleek glass walls, corporate banners printed with meaningless slogans, advancing the frontiers of neuroscience. Lies dressed in professionalism, The power hummed softly and the lights glowed steady, undisturbed. Monitors along the hallways displayed looping messages welcoming non-existent employees back to work. The building itself felt sterile, untouched. And yet, I wasn't alone. As I moved through the halls, I caught glimpses, not directly but in reflections, on the glass panels, on the polished steel elevator doors, on the backs of darkened monitors, always just behind me. My reflection, slightly delayed, smiling faintly when I wasn't. The breathing returned, faint at first, then stronger, sinking with my every step like a predator mimicking my rhythm. Ahead, the executive wing doors stood open. Beyond them, the private research archive. Inside, dim lights illuminated row after row of locked server cabinets and filing drawers. Thin layer of dust coated everything, suggesting this place hadn't been touched since the day they activated Sector 7. And yet the central console still pulsed with life. One monitor glowing with an active file, Project Mirror, final sequence. The words froze me. This was the endpoint. The culmination of everything they had built and everything they had bred me to become. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I scrolled through the file tree. Hundreds of logs, videos, and experimental data scrolled past. Trial dates, failed subjects, anomaly reports, host integrations, all leading to one final entry. Subject 13 pending. I opened the file. A video feed flickered to life. It showed a lab chamber I hadn't seen before. Circular, all glass, and inside sat a chair, identical to the one my father was strapped to, but it wasn't empty. I was staring at myself, or rather a perfect copy of me, fully formed, already waiting. Its eyes opened on the feed, glowing faint blue, and then, even through the feed, it smiled, mimicking my exact expression in real time. A message flashed beneath the video. Synchronization rate 93%. Full integration imminent. My stomach turned. They weren't building hosts one at a time. They were cloning hosts, perfect replicas designed to carry the entities across, fully intact without resistance. And I was the final piece, the one they had prepared for decades. I slammed my fist into the console, sending the monitor sparking and hissing, but I knew the damage was pointless. The process was already underway. Destroying a screen wouldn't stop what was happening. My phone buzzed. A message appeared from no number. Return to Integration Chamber 1. I dropped the phone. The humming in my head grew louder. The reflection wasn't chasing me anymore. It was calling me. I should have run. Every part of me knew that. Knew that the longer I stayed inside this building, the closer I came to the point of no return. But something else had taken hold now. A pull, deep and biological, threading its hooks into the marrow of my bones. The hum beneath my skin had grown into a constant vibration, subtle, yet impossible to ignore. My heart beat to its rhythm. My thoughts synced with its pulse. I wasn't just being called, I was being summoned. Integration Chamber 1 lay beneath the facility, accessible only by a private service elevator hidden behind the executive archive. The panel slid open as I approached, as though the system already recognized me. I stepped inside. The doors closed, sealing me into cold steel silence. As the elevator descended, flickers of memory broke through. Blurry images from my childhood. Sterile rooms, bright lights, masked doctors. My father's voice repeating the same words. "Stay still, Ethan. Don't look into the glass too long." But I had looked, and now I couldn't look away. The doors opened into a cavernous chamber. The air was frigid, tinged with antiseptic. Spotlights illuminated the center platform, where the integration pod awaited. Circular, glass, and humming softly with power. Its mechanical arms flexed and twitched, waiting for their subject. I stepped forward, my breathing shallow. On the far wall, behind thick observation windows, the control room glowed faintly. And standing there, exactly as I knew she would, was Teresa, or whatever was left of her. Her form stood perfectly still, backlit by monitors pulsing with live data streams. The moment our eyes met, I saw it clearly now. The same pale blue flicker behind her irises. She had crossed long ago. "You've come," her voice echoed through the intercom, calm as always. "You've finally accepted what you are." I clenched my fists. "I haven't accepted anything." Her head tilted slightly, as if amused. "You crossed the threshold the moment you entered this chamber. There's nothing left to resist, Ethan. The reflection has been inside you since your first exposure. It simply needed time." My reflection appeared in the curved glass of the pod, mirroring me perfectly, but once again it lagged half a second behind. Its smile lingered longer than mine. Its eyes glowed faintly. "We were always meant to evolve," Teresa continued. "You were born for this, designed for this. Your father understood. He saw the potential. And now," her voice softened into something disturbingly tender, "you will complete what he began." I stepped closer to the pod. The humming in my chest intensified, vibrating through my teeth. Inside the chamber, the copy of me still sat, perfectly still. But its eyes opened again as I approached, and its grin widened, matching my every movement. For a brief second, our gazes locked, not as man to reflection, but as two beings fighting for dominance inside the same existence. It whispered to me, but not aloud. The voice came from inside my skull. "One mind, one body, no more separation." I staggered, gripping my temples. The floor beneath my feet seemed to ripple. "You've already merged more than you realize," Teresa said softly. "Every choice you've made brought you here willingly. The final sequence only formalizes what has already begun." On the monitors, I watched as biometric readings spiked. Synchronization rate 98%. I could feel my muscles twitching, spasming involuntarily. My vision blurred at the edges, shapes bending unnaturally. The reflection inside the pod blinked again, slightly ahead of me now, as if it was leading. I was losing. My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the cold floor, gasping. From above, Teresa's voice turned almost reverent. "You see now, don't you? This isn't death, Ethan. This is ascension. You are not being consumed. You are being perfected. One mind, one body. Step into the light." The integration pod hissed open, releasing a faint white mist that crawled across the floor like reaching fingers. I stared at the empty seat inside, my vision swimming. The reflection smiled wider. "Come home." But something inside me stirred. Small at first, a thin, fragile thread. My voice. My human voice. No. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I grabbed the fallen clipboard nearby, a shard of reality still tethered to who I was. My name printed on every page. The medical lies, the manufactured history, the years they took from me. I wasn't created for them. I was stolen. With a primal scream, I hurled the clipboard through the observation window. Glass exploded, shards raining across the control room. Sparks flew from shattered consoles. The humming faltered. Monitors dimmed. The pod's systems flickered erratically. For the first time, Teresa's face contorted. Not calm now, but surprised. The sync pulse inside my skull stuttered. Synchronization rate 99%. Error. The reflection inside the pod spasmed violently, its grin warping into something grotesque. The link between us faltered for just a second, but a second was enough. I reached for the emergency override lever mounted beside the pod. Teresa's voice screamed through the intercom. "No, Ethan!" I pulled. The chamber's containment alarms erupted. Red lights bathed the room as automated shutdown sequences engaged. The pod convulsed, its glass walls cracking under internal pressure. The reflection inside wailed, a distorted, monstrous sound that made my teeth ache. "Not complete!" It shrieked inside my mind. The humming collapsed into a static hiss. The reflection's image splintered as the chamber finally shattered, releasing a surge of steam and fluid. Its form dissolved into nothing but a collapsing shadow, evaporating before my eyes. And then, silence. For the first time in my life, real silence. The hum was gone. The breathing stopped. Inside my skull, the second heartbeat finally quieted. I staggered backward, collapsing to the floor, choking on shallow breaths. It was over. At least, for now. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey into the Reflection Protocol. A story where the deepest horrors aren't the creatures lurking in the shadows, but the ones buried inside our own minds. Where science crosses the line and identity becomes the ultimate battleground. To everyone who stuck with us through every twist, every whisper in the dark, and every haunting reflection, your support means everything. If this story made your skin crawl, your heart race, or kept you glancing at your mirror tonight, then we've done our job. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unsettling tales like this one. And always remember, not every reflection belongs to you.